Welcome to Popcorn Talk, featuring movie discussions, news, and interviews, presenting The Film Scene with Illeana Douglas. Illeana is an actress, writer, author, and film historian with a need to discuss movies that borders on obsession. You'll learn the history of movies, one great story at a time. The Film Scene is the deep cuts of movie podcasts, featuring movies we love by the people who made them. And now, Illeana Douglas.
Why, hello, everyone. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday. No, it's Friday. We're not used to this.
I'm very excited to be here. We've got Brian Koppelman on the show.
So
today.
exciting. Brian right now is Skyping in from New York, and he's quietly watching as we talk about him, and he's not allowed to talk until we say his name. So, Brian, we're so excited to have you.
Excited but nervous. I said I've had a Brian Koppelman Film Festival.
That's good. That's good. You don't usually get nervous for guests, Illeana. Or do you, and you just hide it?
I think it's because I watched all of his 6-second vines at one time and felt like, I don't know, I spent the last years being unproductive.
I get. Well, of course, you guys know Brian Koppelman. You know his work. Most prominently right now, he's created and showrunning Billions, which is on Showtime. Incredible show. But of course, he's also the writer of Rounders, a really fun movie, Ocean's 13, Walking Tall.
Knock Around Guys.
With
Dennis Hopper.
My personal favorite, The Girlfriend Experience, which I'm super excited to talk about as well.
Solitary Man.
It's incredible filmography. And if you guys are podcasters, so you also know Brian's podcast, The Moment. Really, really cool show. We'll be talking about all of it today.
I know. I can't wait. So, hi, Brian. Thank you so much for being here.
Thrilled. This is awesome.
Oh, good. We're glad to have you, Brian.
The number one question I wanted to ask is how is Bobby Axelrod's portfolio doing today?
Yeah, well, I think that's a really good question. I'll say that he, if anyone would have known in advance all of the coronavirus stats before our government knew, I mean, Axe would have known. He'd have Taylor out there trying to figure it out. I just want to say all those credits are with my lifelong best friend and creative partner, David Levine. So all that stuff, we run the show together and do all the stuff together,
Absolutely. Are there so, okay, I'm not going to get ahead of myself. I want to go back to what I always ask people is, do you remember the first movie you saw and who took you to see it?
So I'm sure that there were movies before this, but the first real going to a movie experience that I had that really affected me, and I know you'll love this one, and it's true. One Saturday, my dad, I guess I was 6 years old or 7. My dad said, we're going to go see a movie today in New York City. And I grew up in Long Island, and the idea of going to the city was always, a big deal. And he said, we're going to go there, and then I'm going to take you to my favorite place to eat lunch. And he took me in to see an early morning screening at a revival house of Modern Times.
Oh, wow.
And it was incredible. So the drive in, he's telling me, listen, this is a silent movie. And he and I used to watch Westerns at home all the time and gangster movies, even from a very young age. And I was highly verbal. You know, if you watch our stuff, Dave and I are writers as directors. When we direct and producers, it's highly sort of verbal stuff, the way we, it's sort of how we appreciate stuff. So I remember my dad saying, this film is silent. There's, and he told me the whole thing. If you would have gone to see this when it came out, there would have been an orchestra playing or a small band, depending where you saw it. And he walked me through it. And, that moment in the movie when Chaplin starts getting fed the equipment, the nuts and bolts and all that stuff. I mean, you can imagine being 7 years old and seeing that. It was one of the signal days of my childhood, really, because being with your father and sharing something like that. And then going to Barney Greengrass where we went afterwards. It's like just a perfect day. So it's seared in my memory.
Yeah, the whole experience. So my family too. We'd argue all the time, but then we'd, go see a movie and then go to Friendly's ice cream afterwards.
Friendly's.
And, my father, did you understand? My father would insist on taking us to European sort of really intellectual movies and then quizzing us if we understood it. Did you understand Joseph Lossi's The Servant?
Right. We had no art. There were no art house theaters. There was one art house theater, sort of near my house. I mean, I grew up, and mostly I watched Westerns, funny movies, and gangster films and crime movies. That's really what I was interested in as a child, largely because my dad and I would watch, and then Dave and I met when we were 15 and together started watching all this stuff. It really wasn't until I saw She's Gotta Have It when I was in college, 19, that everything flipped for me. I saw She's Gotta Have It and Raising Arizona, like within a short window, because Spike's movie rolled out various cities. So it had already done that whole run in New York. So we'd heard about it in Boston. And I remember going to see it, and my whole world exploded, right? Because if you've never seen a film like that, and I was at the perfect age to appreciate that dialogue, to appreciate what he did with the camera, those performances. I understood that he was doing something structurally that I hadn't really seen before. Even though a lot of people killed him for the color sequence, I remember loving it and feeling like it was incredibly bold. And then shortly thereafter, I saw Raising Arizona. And those two things just completely shifted the world for me. Those were the movies that, and by then I'd already had already seen my favorite films of my childhood. I would watch them obsessively over and over again. I went very deep on the stuff I liked, but until I was 19, I didn't go wide. I stayed in a couple of lanes. But then once I saw those movies, I was off to the races. Then you're watching everything you can get your hands on.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you about your dad because and you always say in your work about write what fascinates you. And what has always fascinated me, and I don't know why, because I did not live through this time, but was the Brill building era and the world of Don. And so in reading about your father, I became just incredibly fascinated with that. He worked with Carole King, Neil Sedaka, Barry Mann, and Cynthia Weil, all people that when I did this movie, Grace of My Heart, and I worked at the Brill building. So I was in heaven working at the Brill building. But just talk about your dad and who he was and some of the people that he worked with.
Yeah, for sure. He's, I spoke to him this morning. He's about to turn 80 and he's great. My dad was a songwriter who then became a music publisher and record producer. And so even though I say we didn't watch a lot of art house movies, we were music fanatics. And I grew up in recording studios. We would go, I would spend, all night long with him in recording studios from when I was very little. Some of the greatest memories you could have. So my dad, he discovered groups like the Lovin' Spoonful. He found the song Happy Together for the Turtles. He produced or executive produced like 8 Barbra Streisand albums. So I got to be around some incredibly amazing stuff as a child where watching him talk to singers was just an incredibly invaluable experience as far as learning how to talk to actors, because coaxing a performance out of a lead singer is even way more difficult. They're way more fragile most of the time. And, because if they lose confidence and they can't hit notes, it can spiral in a way that's hard to describe. And so that stuff was incredible for me. My father's sort of generosity to me in that way is a beautiful thing.
So I'm curious, so you never did you ever have thoughts of doing a movie about that era, that music era?
My pal Doug McGrath wrote Beautiful, and he's a brilliant writer. And no, I think they did it as far as that era went. Dave and I had thought about making a movie about the record business in the 80s. We almost were the showrunners for vinyl, and in the end, that didn't work out. But
I wish you were.
It's fine. I think the fuel of that not happening led us to really want to make billions. But I would have liked to sort of take on that challenge in a way because I did live it and because I watched it so closely. I think it's hard though. I think it's really hard to tell that kind of story.
Yeah, it just, I guess, again, I'm fascinated by it, just the partnerships and the husband and wife teams, is the whole elements of it. And then also the element, which it sounds like your father got a little bit into this too, which is when the music industry moved to California and everything shifted and the Beatles came in and people had instruments and the songwriters were no longer needed. And so that fascinates me.
Oh, it's all, yes. It's only really country music now and some pop music where there is a difference between the songwriter and the singer. Most people write their own songs. Yeah, I mean, we lived in New York. They wanted to raise us here. Sometimes I would go on trips with him to LA, and then I would get to go to this recording studio there. And he took me. I don't know as you did. I did see a couple of movies too early. I saw. He took me to see. We went on a trip to LA because I was like off from school for a week, and he had to go make a record. And he asked my mom, and I guess my sister stayed home with my mom, and they were they were really young. Like I was 8, they were 6 and 4. And he took me to LA, and we went and saw Tommy in the movie theater. And I was 8 years old. I was not 9.
Yeah.
And that was just a lot to. We went to Mateo's afterwards, but that was just a lot to Mateo's, which is the one with the train that goes around.
I think
LA,
I think that's Mateo's. I don't know if it exists
Mateo's
anymore, but yeah.
No, it might not, but it did. I know you've been there for sure.
Yeah.
But I remember seeing Tommy, and that was a lot to.
I know, and Marty. Yeah. That's so funny because I had the same thing. I went with my dad, and he was very embarrassed and got up and left.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he was mortified. He left.
I was so fascinated with Elton John, right?
Oh, me too.
As an 8-year-old, to Elton with the boots and the whole thing, singing Pinball Wizard, and I think I've gone back and watched pretty much all of those movies that I watched as a kid.
Yeah.
But I don't think I've ever gone back and seen all of Tommy. I like Where I Have It in My Head.
Right.
I know the album by heart, both the soundtrack and the Who's original, but I don't think I've ever made myself watch the movie again. I want to remember it as fucked up and thing as it felt to me then, because it stirred me up as only a movie can for so long.
Yeah. Well, I think the only reason I went to the movie is because of Elton John. I think I was that's what would bring me to a movie. Like, I convinced my grandmother to take me to cruising, and then because I saw Al Pacino, and then like 15 minutes in, she was like, "We're not seeing this movie," drag me out, So that's what would happen. Is I didn't, because I was too young. It was just like any movie, anytime. I just wanted to. To go in there. I want to talk about your 6-second videos.
Sure.
Now, when they were out, were they only? I sort of barely remember Vine because it came and went. Mm-hmm. But so what's on YouTube now is the entirety of all of them, which is really fascinating. I sent it to a couple people to watch the whole thing.
That's crazy. Yeah, I made one of those a day for like 360 days or something like that, because I really had this notion that everyone was making this idea of trying to write too complicated. Particularly, I thought there were a lot of hucksters like, giving seminars with the Radisson. And anytime someone's trying to get you to go to a Radisson seminar, you should. I mean, even though in Fargo they say a Radisson, that's nice, and it is, but I don't know that you want to pay someone to give you a genre workshop in a seminar. And so I would get these questions on Twitter from people asking me something they'd learned in one of these seminars and saying, "Do I have to do this?" And so finally, I just started talking into my phone on Vine, and then it just took off. Like there were 60 million views of that thing that I did on Vine, and because the central message was, you don't need someone else to give you permission to do something creative. If you want to do something creative, you can do it. We all in some way want some authority figure to tell us we're special enough, we're good enough, we have something to offer. But the truth is, there's no scepter someone can touch you with that imbues you with this ability or desire. If you have this crazy desire to do this stuff, I want you to try and work with rigor at it. And that was the whole thing I was trying to talk about was, look, I'm not saying go live your dream because it's not easy. But if this is something that's killing you to not do, fucking do it. Mm-hmm. But no, you're going to have to work incredibly hard every single day. And I would realize things like 1 page a day, even if you took weekends off, you are still going to have 260 pages. Right. And once you start, you're not going to want to take the weekends off. And you could write 3 screenplays in a year. You could write a novel in a year. And also, once you start, you won't really just write 1 page a day. So I was trying to help tell people, like, in 1 hour a day, you can, and it doesn't be writing. If you want to learn to be a dancer, spend 1 hour a day, find a little place off in a corner and start dancing. Nobody has to tell you it's okay. And I would also try to encourage people, who in your life is secretly uh, doesn't want you to succeed because they're worried they'll look bad. So, don't tell them what you want to do. Don't give them the chance to tell you your dream is foolish. And so I started talking about this stuff. And it was at a weird time in my own career. It was a moment after I'd had a movie come out that had done really poorly and gotten a critical drubbing. And I'm sure that as I was talking to people, I was talking to myself, telling myself that this, I didn't know that at the time, but when I look back on it, that was when I was trying to give myself some sense of momentum. And so I was probably, when I would say something and I would get it reinforced from an artist I admired, it would send me forward. And I found it to be a really special thing to do. And that's what led to my podcast, which, continues that conversation.
Right, which talks about, pivotal moments in your life or in your career. Do you have I feel like I've had 100, but do you have you had one? It's hard to pin down one pivotal moment.
Sure. Well, my podcast is me asking other people for their moments, not my own. But
now I'm
but no, I'm on yours, so I can. No, I'm saying it's not like if someone listens to mine, they're going to hear me going, well, once in 1974, I remember because it was third grade, and I mean, there's none of that. But I think a couple of them. I mean, the sort of central one for me is when I was 30 and I was a blocked writer, partially because I'd spent a lifetime thinking artists were special. They were anointed by somebody. They knew how to dress a certain way, or they knew exactly what books or movies to read or watch, and they were recognized by some authority figure. But I was 30, I had a young child at home, Amy and I did, and I wanted to be the kind of father who would tell him that he could be anything. And I realized I wasn't. I'd gotten to 29 years old without ever smoking a cigarette. Not an easy thing to do. I mean, I'd done plenty of drugs and all that, but I'd never smoked a cigarette. And suddenly I was smoking a pack a day at 29, and I was eating double cheeseburgers, and I was in a job where I was successful, but I was miserable. And it finally got to be too much. And I realized I had to find a way to risk failing as an artist, and that's when I went to my best friend who was tending bar, and I said, hey, we love movies so much. David was already writing. He had written a novel that later got published, and he was trying to write screenplays, and he said, I'll write a screenplay with you, and then soon thereafter I walked into a poker club and called him and said, I think I know what we should write the movie about. And then we started meeting every single morning before I'd go into work, and he would be done tending bar. We would meet every day. And, I don't have to tell you what happens. The moment I started doing that work, I felt alive in a way I hadn't ever before. And then whether the thing was going to get made or not, or sell or not, man, that hour and a half of doing the work, hard as it was, right? Because you don't know if it's any good and you're failing. As you know, doing any kind of art involves a lot of failure all the time.
Right.
And you're always coming up short of the feeling you're trying to express. We all are, all the time. Sometimes you hit it, but it takes so much to get to. It didn't matter. The mere fact of doing it, the mere fact of these characters starting to come to life, of seeing this structure layout, of that feeling of emptiness at the end of it, I just knew, well, I'm going to be doing this forever now. I hope I can make a career of it, but I'm never not going to be doing this.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I guess kept doing the things that got me to do it. Morning pages, the way Julia Cameron describes, and taking long walks. And I added meditation into it. I do TM twice a day. And so everything I do is to try to stoke, to get what Stephen Pressfield calls the resistance out, and to stoke the possibility that I can do some creative work that day.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in thinking I always say the moment you commit to something in a weird way, the universe will help you along, but you have to commit. And like you said, it's just writing something, saying, I know I have to write this thing. And then weirdly, articles will suddenly pop up and you meet this person, and it feels as if it has a destiny. I do believe in one of the things in your, in that you talked about, which I do find is very hard to find people to read your work and criticize in a way that is not debilitating. to move the project forward, without, crushing you or saying, this reminds, there's this show on HBO. It's just like this. Those are the
You're
worst.
so right.
That's
You
not,
have to choose carefully. I mean, Julia Cameron talks about this great in The Artist's Way.
yeah,
You have to choose who are you going to entrust with your feelings, with your emotions. And that's a
Right.
life. That's not an artist thing, really.
yeah,
It's a life thing. I always tell people when you go home for Thanksgiving dinner, be really careful about who you tell your hopes to.
right.
If you know that your second cousin has always wished they could be an actor, don't say your car is packed and you're going to drive to California, because they're going to tell you the 40 reasons why you're going to fail. Send them a card when you get your first casting. I mean, but this stuff's hard, man. And we are so trained in a school system that's kind of mechanized to stay in our lane. And if you weren't cast in the junior musical or the junior high school musical, or, you didn't get the part you wanted in something, or you wrote a piece that you thought was creative for an English teacher and they wrote back and said, no, you have to write a funnel essay, it can crush you. And it can take years to discover that and find a way to open up again.
Mm-hmm.
But it's worth it. It's worth it to do it.
I think you can only do it by doing it. I agree with you. It's just I always tell everybody, and they laugh at me. I wrote a book, and I tell everybody that they should write a book, even if they're not going to publish it, and they laugh at me. And I said, you really, but because you remember so much more than you actually think, and you weirdly put together who you are, and
100%. You're so right. You just got I constantly discover the way I feel about things by writing.
Yeah.
Things I would never have known, points of view. And also when you're writing fiction, you're making up characters. When you allow them to argue something out, you definitely find yourself within that argument. You just do.
Yeah. Okay. So let's get to some of the movies. Rounders was a little bittersweet for me to watch. The DP, Jean-Yves Escoffier.
I love Jean-Yves. I loved him.
He was one of the most brilliant, heartful guys. And man, that movie looks beautiful. It's just a beautiful looking movie.
Those yellow, the way Jean-Yves had this view of the outside with these yellow lights and everything. And I remember Jean-Yves and Jean Dahl talking a lot about the way they were going to make New York at night look, and did they do a beautiful.
Yeah, they really did.
We were on set. Dave and I were on set every day of that movie, and as writers, we couldn't have asked for a better first experience than that.
I can imagine. So the overall film. The other thing that struck me was this era when all these great character-driven movies. I said, "Oh God, I remember movies like this." And John Turturro was always in them, and you'd always have these. There was like not two characters; there was like six characters, so you could, it was fun seeing Josh Mistel and all these.
Well, it was so great to have Josh in that movie, and then. He's a great guy. I mean, he's a real poker player, Josh. So
he is
awesome. Yeah.
Interesting. So going into the movie, one of the things that I noticed, which is my theme, now I don't know if it's your theme or not, but I did pick up on this theme in this particular one with Matt Damon and Edward Norton as Worm, that this is something that I've seen in a lot of movies. And I mentioned them to you, but before we were going to do the show, El Dorado, Mean Streets, even like Fredo and Michael Corleone. This idea that one guy's trying to do good and go on the straight and narrow, and the guy is a screw up, but they're friends from childhood, and somehow it's really about their love relationship. And I was thinking as I was writing about it, even then, Double Indemnity hit me with the great end of the scene where he says, "I love you too," and how much I couldn't find. So my question is twofold. One is, it's such a fascinating theme, and I learn a lot about men. Sometimes when people say, "Oh, I really don't want to see that movie because it's a chick flick," or "I really don't want to see that movie because it's a guy movie," I like seeing the movie so I can gain some insight into the world of how men think. And I think that Rounders is very profound in the relationship that they have, the love relationship. So I was wondering if you could talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, you're right on it, of course. I think the movie's about a few different things, but the crazy thing about Rounders is it was not a success in the movie theater. It was there 3 weeks, and it wasn't a success. But, and this ties in directly to what you're asking. What David and I, it's funny. Pope of Greenwich Village more than Mean Streets for us when we were that age. It was Pope because Pope, which was another version of Mean Streets, but for us, Mickey Rourke and Eric Roberts and Burt Young, that movie was where I guess that was a bigger influence directly at that age. Probably the Catholicism in Mean Streets was, when we were at our formative time, not something that we necessarily related to. Later, we completely got that movie. But A Diner was really the movie for the two of us. Diner was all about what happens when you sort of leave that childhood cocoon and then reconnect with those people. And can you find versions of yourselves that still fit? And if you can't, then you have to leave that behind. What else are you leaving behind of yourself?
Right.
And so that stuff was definitely all in the movie, you know? And then also, though, here was a guy, Matt's character, who was, you know, in law school at night, as I had been, and was faced with this question of deciding whether to try this crazy, reckless thing of becoming a poker player, even though everyone told him it was irrational, or choosing a safer path. And I think for David, for both of us, that question, at Dave, I think was 27 or 28, I was 29, 30 when we wrote it. And I mean, that's a pretty central question to people at that age. And our goal with the movie was to write a movie that guys, as you're saying, really, it was a film for guys like us. The way we watched Rounders, we wanted them to watch our movie. And so it's so satisfying to me that now that movie is, you know, I get hundreds of questions every week on the internet about that movie still. I go on podcasts dedicated to it, and they're a revival. People are obsessed with that film 22 years later, and they know every word. I can't go to any sort of gathering of guys from the age of 18 to 60 where they're not quoting the film at me, because I think the two of us were so focused on making something that we would love and in that way, that somehow what we wanted to put in it got out there to the people we wanted to receive it eventually.
I think I also think, to me, it plays almost like a fable. And again, it's a movie that it looks so beautiful that I think that is what adds. It's not just because that's going to be my next question, is when you write and then you're filming a movie that's wall to wall dialogue, you know, there has to be a way to make that artful. And
totally. Well, that's what was such an education to be with Jean-Yves and John Dahl.
Yeah.
And we've kept working with John. Dahl's directed 4 or 5 episodes of Billions. I mean, we've worked with John on and off the whole time because, he taught us that. I mean, we had a real film school experience being on that movie. And in particular, we spent about 2 weeks before we started shooting with John, where he talked about just that, where he would say, okay, this scene, we need to end this scene sooner. We need to put an air in this scene. And what was great was he didn't bring in some pro. He didn't rewrite us. He would just put the questions to us. He would sit in these high back chairs at the Royalton, in the lobby of Royalton. That's where we were in New York making the film, and by where that vodka bar was in the back. But we were in those high back chairs, and we would just sit for hours at a time. And he would go every line of the script with us, and he would say, you know, can that line be sharper? Are these two things redundant? What does that mean? Hey, I think this scene can end differently. And he said, you're going to see the difference between writing for writing and then writing to shoot something are entirely different. And at the end of this, if you pay attention, meaning at the end of the whole movie, you will understand how to write something that's shootable.
Wow.
And so, yes, you know, Illeana, it's a huge difference.
Totally.
Totally. And we did. I mean, we did come out of that experience completely knowing the difference and learning how to put something on its feet in a real way.
The other question that I wanted to ask you is the theme that often sort of pops up and then going all the way to Billions is the father-son relationship, which
Sure.
Martin Landau is not his father, but he certainly kind of represents a father type figure. Maybe you disagree.
Well, I would say, well, one, I don't, when people talk about their own themes,
Uh-huh.
the truth is, I'm a bit of a deconstructionist. We don't know. You'll know later. It's
Right.
for other people to sort of recognize it. So, sure, these things. I mean, I would say Solitary Man, which is really about a father and a daughter, in many ways. You know, Michael Douglas's character, which for me is our best film, and the one that critics like the most. That really was about something we witnessed. I wrote that one, Dave and I directed it together, but that was just about something that I witnessed, really, that started and someone I cared about.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, you're going to filter in, and Michael's character is definitely one who could have been in Billions or in Rounders or Knockaround Guys. I think the thing is, we're fascinated by the way people self-mythologize.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess sometimes that comes in the form of an older person who seems wise. Sometimes they may be wise, but an older person who seems wise and a younger person trying to learn their own lessons in that way. So that in Solitary Man, that's Jesse Eisenberg talking to Michael Douglas, right? And yes, in Rounders, that's Martin Landau's character, who is actually wise, and Matt's character.
Okay, so I want to move to Knockaround Guys with Dennis. I just got to ask you like a fan question. What was Dennis Hopper like?
It was unbelievable.
Obsessed with
Unbelievable
Dennis
to get to work with Dennis. You know, I mean, did you know him well?
I got to know him. He's a mystic. The name of my book is called "I Blame Dennis Hopper." My parents saw the movie Easy Rider, and my dad quit his job and became a hippie and started acting like Dennis Hopper. So he was my father. And then I met him in a movie, and he played my father figure boyfriend in the movie. So it was
What movie was that?
It was called Search and Destroy. Perfect name for that. But Millennium
I'm sorry
Films.
that I haven't seen that. I'm sorry I haven't seen that one. I'll go.
It's
make
a hard
sure to
one. It's an art film made by Avi Lerner, which ends up having mixed results.
It's really difficult. Well, Solitary Man, Avi financed Solitary Man. It was really, but we had Soderbergh was one of the producers, and he really protected it. The movie.
Yeah.
Protected the movie.
But Dennis is a mystic. I mean, in my mind, he offered so much, but it was through talking to Dennis about things, and his own life is so fascinating. And anytime I see him, post, I feel like, he started out in the studio system, then he did independent films, and then the end of his career, he was incredible. I think, in
Quentin's movie, he was just off the chart. I mean, Tony Scott's movie, but really Quentin's movie is one of. It's so great that Dennis got to lay that down for another generation of people,
Yeah.
And I just watched. Did you go watch The Apocalypse Now, the last one, the newest one?
I saw it on the big screen.
Me too. I went and saw the latest version on the big screen in the city.
Yes.
Ben Shankman, who's a great actor and pal, we went, and seeing Dennis up there really made me smile, man.
Oh my God, he's a mystic.
What do you want me to say? That he's a wise man? It's the best.
Yeah. Did he? Well, I saw him there with his smoking his cigar, and I don't know. It just was like I don't know. It just must have been fun. I'm getting off.
Well, he
was
teaching. He was teaching all the. No, it was great. At one point, one actor went up, which means that they forgot their lines for people listening, and that's what that means. An actor went up in a scene, and a kid, a 25-year-old, and tried to call cut, and Dennis went, "No, man. Stay in it. Keep it going. Something magical is going to happen." And he was like, "No, kid, this is it. This is, you're alive right now. Capture this." And it was fucking awesome. It was just great to watch him be so present and so in it in that way.
Yeah. I felt it just a through line, again, from James Dean to Dennis Hopper to him being on the set. It was, that to me is like modern acting all sort of comes from, Montgomery Clift, and then Brando, and then Dean, and then that's it. Nothing has changed. Like if you look at Edward Norton, everything. Like I find the parallels between those three actors. That's just my theory of all modern acting. And there I've said it. No, I
Where
mean
does
you
Philip
could.
Seymour Hoffman fit, though?
I see Philip. Oh, I definitely. He's more the Paul Muni, Spencer Tracy. You're right. He's the sideline intellectual.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't always fit, but most modern actors, James Franco comes to mind, seem to fall. Like if you had a family tree of Paul Muni, various actors, it starts to funnel into really a modern type of acting. That's a whole other
I would
thing that I'm
include. I would say the
fascinated with.
one person I would want to include in that, who doesn't. All actors love him and people love him, but I know he came up with those guys, but Hackman did do something totally different than everyone else.
Yeah, that's true. I love Gene
And I
Hackman.
think that there are other. I think that Hackman's influence is pretty huge in a certain kind of actor, like in Edward. And I think that
Yeah,
Hackman has the ability, the ability to project a certain kind of fierce intellect and verbal sharpness,
yeah.
and the way he reins in his anger. That's very specific. That's specific.
It's funny you say that. My grandfather worked with him. That he said it was his favorite actor he ever worked with. Of
Really,
all the actors, and he worked with Paul Newman, and he said
of
Gene
course.
Hackman was his favorite.
Oh,
He
great.
kept him on his toes. Okay, before we get to Billions, my last, just because I love this movie, I love The Illusionist, which is
Me too.
another. That sort of. But it did very well. But man, I love that movie. That's another. That's Edward. I love anything about magic. And anything that's the turn of the
Well,
century.
Neil Berger is a great writer director, and Dave and I um, had made Neil's first movie with him, and we produced that movie and put Edward in it, and that's where we first got to meet Giamatti, who obviously we have a long creative relationship with now, and it was a movie that was impossible to get made. My favorite thing about that is not only did it do well. I mean, we made that movie for $14 million. It did 100 million worldwide, and but it was made with independent financier, and we never saw any of the money, but we did do 100 million. And it was turned down at every step. The script was turned down. When we had the actors attached, it was turned down. When we screened it at Sundance, no distributor wanted to buy it. There was only one. It was one of those things where the whole time David and I were going, this is fucking great and really commercial. I've now cursed 3 times and I apologize. But it's true that it is Hollywood. Bill Goldman was right. They never know. And so that was a film that for us always had this ineffable quality to it. These incredible performances, this great writer director, but it seemed too unconventional in a way for part of Hollywood, and it seemed too mainstream for another part of the business. And they
Right.
thought it was a tweener, and we just knew it was a movie that would just wildly appeal to people. And then Neil went on to make Limitless and
Yeah.
a couple other big hit movies.
It's a movie that for me just harkens back to like a big MGM movie, from the 40s or 50s. I love anything with mystery, romance, which is not a thing that people do that much anymore. It seemed to be very popular in the 40s and 50s. Kind of mystery, romance,
Yeah.
gothic, turn of the century. I mean, it fits in, even though it's a completely different type of movie, but Gaslight, Ghost of Mrs. Muir, anything
Oh,
that's
yeah,
about
of course.
anything that's about mystery and romance, and I don't know, I love that movie. So I didn't even know had been a part of it when I started doing my research. I said, oh, I love that movie. All right, let's get to Billions.
Yes. I don't know if you know this, Brian. We actually, our sister network, AfterBuzz TV, covers Billions. We love
I
that
do.
show.
I love that show. It's hilarious. Great.
Oh, thanks, man. I appreciate it.
I watch it. Yeah. Of course.
Do you feel like you were trying to comment when you were developing Billions? Were you trying to comment on like the state of capitalism, or were you thinking more about just telling a good story?
We definitely were not only thinking about telling a good story. I mean,
Yeah.
we noticed that it seemed to us that Americans had suddenly developed this incredible affinity for certain characteristics, like people with a certain kind of power, verbal acuity, a kind of thin but very sharp intellect, and they would forget real qualities of character that used to matter in exchange for those characteristics. And We noticed who were the most popular reality stars, the president and Mark Cuban, who is a friend, and who I think is a great guy. But we noticed that. We noticed these prosecutors who were using offices of the public good for their own personal good, and felt like it was just incredibly fertile ground to set up this sort of conflict. And then we are going to follow the David Chase maxim of making sure it's entertaining. And because that, we're not trying to serve you vitamins, we're trying to entertain you. But we absolutely have always written about the world that we cared about and saw. We've always followed our curiosity. And this world, as it existed, felt important to us and felt like the kind of thing that could sustain our curiosity for a very long time.
I wanted to talk about the casting process when you were originally getting started. You'd worked with Paul Giamatti before, but what were you looking for in the two main characters? They're in their dynamic, and then did they ever read opposite each other?
Neither of them had to read. They were.
Oh, I guess that's my world.
We just called. What's that?
Sorry, I guess that's my world. I'm kidding. I'm sorry. I'm
no,
sorry.
I'm
self-deprecating.
We just called Paul. That's funny. We just called Paul. I'm here at Illeana Douglas. You don't have to read.
He's from Connecticut, like me.
And we just called Paul and said, "Hey, we're sending you this thing. We want to do it with you."
So does he call up and go, "Okay, I'm sorry, I'm interrupting because I'm very excited." So I go back to what you were saying. Go back.
We sent Paul an email and then got on the phone with him and called his manager just to be professional. And he read it immediately and said, "All right, let's talk about this." We flew to LA the next day. We had dinner, shook hands, and that was it. And then Damian, originally we were told wouldn't do television again for a while. And then the head of Showtime, David Nevins, called and said, "I think I can get Damian to read this thing. If you guys would want to make the show with him." And we said, "Of course we want to make the show with him." Mm-hmm. And Damian was harder because Paul we had a long, real history with,
Right.
Damian, it was a bunch of Skypes and meetings in person because he really knew Paul hadn't done this before, a long running TV. Damian really knew that he was in for years of this if it went well.
Right.
And so I think he wanted to know, well, what are you guys thinking about modern capitalism? And where do you think this fits? And how do you want to shoot it? What do you think this guy dresses like? And how do you think it was an amazing process. At the end of it, again, we all shook hands and said, "Let's do this."
Mm-hmm. At the end of the day for them, is it easy for them to take off these characters, or
I don't want to talk about their processes. You got to ask them.
Fair enough. I do want to ask though specifically about Taylor. I think we've had Asia in studio before. For those of you who might not be watching Billions, Asia Kate Dillon plays Taylor, who's the first non-binary character on TV. So that's been really meaningful. Especially we have a huge LGBTQ plus audience on our other network. The thing I so appreciate about that portrayal is it's weaved so naturally into the fabric of the show. It doesn't feel like there's any kind of agenda pushing with the way that character is written. Can you speak to developing Taylor and sort of why
we were not trying to? Yeah, you're right. We were not trying to create some object lesson. We were. The way originally So I guess I was probably 50. I'm 53, and Dave's a year and a half younger than I am, and we didn't really know about this idea of gender non-binary people. And within a short time of one another, each of my kids, I had a kid in high school and a kid in college. And my daughter came home one day and said, at the beginning of this mod, every however many weeks, the teacher asked us all to tell our pronouns. And the teacher said, we're going to do it again in the beginning of the next mod. And somebody identified as gender non-binary. I said, what does that mean? She explained it to me. And then my son was at Harvard, and he went to a homeless shelter in Cambridge for teenagers. And he called that night and he said, it was awesome. You walk in and they ask you to tell your pronouns. And he started talking about this gender non-binary thing. And I went in the writer's room the next day and I said, there's this, we got to all understand this. And one of the other writers, a guy named Willie Reale, said, yeah, I was at an event in New York and I met this person and they told me the term they used was genderqueer. they're gender non-binary, we can have them come in and talk to us. So that person came in and talked to us, and we realized we'd been looking for a way to introduce a character who externally would not seem like Axe, but in whom Axe would recognize himself. And so the idea of making that character gender non-binary, but Axe is equal in every way, just seemed like a great thing that the audience wouldn't see it coming. And then, of course, we did love the idea of being able to portray an underrepresented group, but in a way, exactly as you're saying, that wasn't about the fact of the person being underrepresented. It was about, hey, this exceptional person, we're going to bring them onto the show. We're not going to run from what this means, but we're not going to hit you over the head with it. And then we found magic in that we found Asia Kate Dillon.
Yeah, they're so good in that show. It's incredible.
They're the best.
Yeah.
Just amazing.
Is it also a comment? I mean, you were talking in the beginning about Westerns, and some of the great Westerns are like the old Lions versus the new Gunslingers. And
the Gunslinger thing is hard. I would say that is hardwired into everything we do. I mean, in Rounders, they talk about gunslingers. That we describe poker players that way. That Knockout Guys is a modern Western in Montana. That is, the bad sheriff is wearing a cowboy hat in Knockout Guys, and there's no doubt that we're constantly thinking of those archetypes. Because the one movie we didn't mention is Magnificent Seven, right? Obviously, we all saw Seven Samurai later and understood why that was the superior film.
Yeah.
But to David and me, James Coburn throwing knives represents the ultimate sort of cool male archetype from the McQueen kind of school, right? And then McQueen in that movie, and Yul Brynner, and we've definitely played out, that scene when the kid comes in because he wants to be part of the group, and Yul Brynner just fucks with him by closing his hands and doing that whole thing. We've played that out in everything we've ever done, for sure.
Well, Damian Lewis, I mean, he literally played Steve McQueen in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. He does bear,
striking resemblance.
Yeah, he really does. So he's got that kind of that swagger in Billions versus Paul, who's although people from the that district they're superstars too. All the district. So the DA in New York is really having a moment. How much are they involved in? I mean, Jesus.
We did our research with the U.S. Attorney's Office, and now Paul's character is the Attorney General of the state. But we did our research by talking to all this.
I feel
we
like
still talk to lawyers and all that stuff.
When the show started, I didn't have. Now with Trump and everything, and there's DAs on television every single night. So now I know more. I have more of an awareness of the Southern District of New York.
Yeah, because the Southern District is where Preet Bharara was, and we were, we definitely spoke to Preet and had dinners with him, and got to pick his brain.
Do you ever get in trouble if you put things in the show and you have to thinly veil it?
People are only annoyed if you leave them out, despite what they may say.
That's so funny.
I love it.
Will the show be continuing, or do you look for? I can't say any. I mean, where do you look for a resolving? I mean, any great show. Do you have the ending in your head, even if you don't?
Dave and we understand where we're going.
And how does I have to ask, like, how with the election and if the stock market, I mean, is that something that impacts the show? Or
not now. We're filming now this season, and that's not. I mean, there's no coronavirus in the show.
Well, no, sometimes on shows, it's almost a mistake to start commenting on, the parents lose all their money and they move in and now they have to move in with the kids, so it's not going to happen. They'll maintain their social identities.
Well, people will watch the show and see.
Fair enough. I do want to ask, we have showrunners on, and I love to ask showrunners, what are 3 shows that you watched in the last year that you're obsessed with?
I'll tell you the Crown for me is like everything in the world. I just love the Crown. And I loved Mindhunter. I'm so sad Mindhunter is not coming back. I just love that show. And then I loved Ugly Delicious, Dave Chang's show.
Oh, yeah. Netflix has some really interesting non-scripted.
Yeah.
Cool.
So that's 3. I'd say those 3 I love.
You also recommended a couple books, Paul Mazursky's Show Me the Magic, which is a great book.
It's fantastic. That's a fantastic book.
And I was pals with Paul. He was a wonderful person. And I'm gonna get a Blink of an Eye. I have a.
Walter Murch's book is so good.
I know that caught my eye. I haven't read it, so I'm looking.
Oh, you'll love it. You will love it as a filmmaker. You'll love it. It's really special.
I like any movie book.
And Lumet's book is Lumet's book is perfect. Also, making movies.
His is good. They're all good. I like.
And Kazan's book is really good. I love on directing.
Although he doesn't give many other people credit. I'm a big Joe Mankiewicz fan, so anything about him, Billy Wilder, I like anything about him.
I mean, you guys, all Mankiewiczes are good with you guys. That's a big part of the whole thing. Yeah.
That's true. Are you a Patty Chayefsky fan at all? Do you have any writers?
Of course.
I mean, like I like watching Network, even though it's totally. The dialogue is so overblown, but that's kind of what I love about it.
Spectacular. Faye Dunaway is so good in that movie.
Yeah.
David Mamet, is the sort of for me, Levinson and Mamet and the Coen brothers and Quentin and Spike Lee are probably, the people who, in a way, were like the biggest dialogue, and Oliver Stone also as a writer certainly had a huge impact, I think.
Yeah, I go back to the past, and I don't know. I sort of get on a jag, and then I watch all this person's movies, and then I move up to someone else, or were you a Parasite fan this year?
Me too. Oh, and I will say, sorry, like I love Preston Sturges and I love Billy Wilder and William Wilder. Like, I mean, we could, Sweet Smell of Success is also as good a movie as for dialogue. Like if people want to go and watch something older, and a movie I recommend on something like this that you've seen but most people haven't is William Wilder's movie Dodsworth.
Oh yeah, it's so funny. So many men love Dodsworth. What is it about?
Is that true?
Oh my God, yes.
I like never come across anybody. I mean, a few friends of mine, Glenn Kenny, but most people don't love that movie.
Oh my God! Why do men love that movie? And now I'm sort of fascinated. It's like why I love the Heartbreak Kid.
Wait, who's come on this podcast and mentioned Dodsworth?
Well, I know Jeff Garlin. It's his favorite film.
Ah, are you serious?
Yes.
I love Garland, and he was on my podcast. I didn't know that.
You got to text him.
I texted him last night. I'm texting him now about this.
Say, Jeff, I'm talking with Illeana. She just said, Dodsworth, go.
Oh, that is amazing. He and I maybe we're going to have to do a Dodsworth podcast together, me and Jeff, just dedicated to Dodsworth.
Josh Olson, the writer, Dodsworth.
Really? He loves it too?
Oh my God. I'm just like, what is it with you guys? Dodsworth. It's a good movie. I like Walter Houston. It's very sad. Oh, it's incredible. The mean woman ruins his life. Yeah, it's terrible.
And it's the guy on a walk. I mean, I guess the guy's on a walkabout in an era where you couldn't be on a walkabout,
Yes. And Mary Astor too.
I don't know.
She's pretty great. Anyway, Brian, this has been so much fun. Please come back anytime. Where do you hang out in New York? So if anybody wants to stalk you, do you have any bars or places you frequent?
Yeah, Twitter. They can find me there.
And that's at Brian Koppelman, yes?
Yes, at Brian Koppelman on Twitter.
Yes.
Well, Brian, we know how busy you are right now because you're show running a huge hit on Showtime. So we can't thank you enough for coming on.
Thank you.
My absolute pleasure.
Totally. You're welcome back whenever.
Thank you. Now I'm going to go think about why guys love Dodsworth. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brian. We'll see you next time. Thanks.
Have a great day.
Bye.
So long.
That was fun.
Yeah, that was a blast.
Yeah, nice guy.
Oh my God, awesome! I talk movies all day long.
It's funny, we were talking before. A lot of his films are about men, very masculine films, but he's a total sweetheart. He just came on. You can tell he loves this business.
Yeah, and offers such great advice too.
Yeah.
Which is so important. But ultimately, all the advice in the world comes down to, like he said, you have to sit there and you have to do it, and that's the hardest thing of all. You just have to sit there for 4 hours and turn your phone off. And
I really resonated too with him talking about the fact that you don't need permission to do it. You shouldn't wait for someone else's validation or affirmation, because a lot of times, like you were just saying, the difference between things getting made is who's actually doing it. you know?
Right. And I feel like you've got to give yourself so many, inspirations. And so when somebody like Brian recommends a movie or talks about a Western or says The Magnificent Seven, then it makes you want to, you want to watch it. And I feel like you need so much encouragement these days too, so when somebody you admire recommends something, that makes you want to see that, and then you can maybe find something or incorporate it into your work.
Yeah, Julia Cameron, who he mentioned, wrote that book, The Artist's Way, and she talks about like the well. Like you have to be filling your well before you can create, because you have to be drawing inspiration from somewhere. So like you do have to be watching things, and a lot of our listeners are filmmakers, actors, whatever. If you're not immersed in it, you're not going to have what you need to produce.
That's what, I think. And I go back to the conversation, remember, that I talked about a couple weeks ago where I spoke to the actor, and he said, well, I think the person would be flattered if I never signed anything they did. And,
I don't know about that.
And I just never, I gain confidence by, by watching. Oh, one last thing I wanted to mention, very important life lesson I got this week, which is interesting in watching all of Brian's vines, and kind of, you sort of think about, where do I get inspiration? And as you know, I go to a dance class 4 days a week. I went into my dance teacher, and we were talking about something, and all of a sudden he was talking about the dance number, and he said, it's good, but remember, don't dance it like it's the first time you're dancing. You've done this 100 times. And I thought, my God, that's such a wonderful, and I translated it to my life, and I've got an upcoming pitch, and it's like, don't do things as if it's the first time you've done it. If you have to make a call or go on a date or do anything that you feel a little stressed out about, do it as if it's the 100th time you've done it, not the first time.
It's funny because you, among the actors still working today, you have one of the most immersive or the most extensive filmographies. Is that something you have to remind yourself of? Because I would assume...
I never look.
Yeah.
I can't.
But I'm more in terms of when action gets called, do you feel like you need to remind yourself, oh my gosh, I've been working for decades, or does it feel new each time?
Yeah, because it's always, I feel it's very much like a carpenter, where you have to go in and do the best job that you can for them. And so that's the only thing that's stressful for me. I just go to it and I've got incredibly high standards of what I would like to do to make it, really good. And then I also have multiple things going on, my own writing, or I'm working on the book, I'm just a script, I got a pitch, I got so we're all incredible multitaskers this year, and we're doing social media. My goodness, there's a lot. The hardest thing is just like you have to go home at night and watch all the new shows and all the new movies. So the time management is what I find is the hardest thing as you get older, and going between being a fogey of like, I can't go anywhere, I got to work on my work, versus you feel as if, well, I only have one life and I could be out there and be entertaining and all those kind of things.
Well, such a fun show today. And again, thank you, Brian, for coming on. We'd love to have you back whenever. Of course, you guys know Billions is on Showtime. Make sure you're watching. And we're very excited. March is dedicated to all female writers, actors, and filmmakers. So in honor of Women's History, as it should be, we will be featuring all female guests next week. But we are taking next week off.
We're taking next week off. Yes. And then the rest of March, all female guests, authors, great female comedian, Kathy Griffin's going to be on. So
Kathy Griffin is coming to this studio.
It's going to be fun.
We're going to have to
fasten your seatbelts.
Gird our loins, Illeana. She is one of the quickest witted people. It's going to be. I'm excited to see you interview her particularly.
I'm excited too. I've known Kathy for a long time,
it's fun.
So I'm very excited about it, and I feel a shift.
Yes.
Shift in the environment with women and equality and everything on the horizon.
Absolutely.
I want to thank you, Jeff, and thank everyone for listening. If you have any comments, please let us know. And as we always say, everyone's life is like a movie with a beginning, a middle, and an end. Today was like Tommy Western
And Dodsworth.
Poker. It's all in there. I hope you had a great time listening. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day. Bye.
Thanks for tuning into the Film Scene with Illeana Douglas, airing exclusively on the Popcorn Talk Network. We bring you this show for free because we're just as passionate and borderline obsessed with film as you are. And it would mean a lot if you would please subscribe to our podcast and give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts. It takes 5 minutes to review the show, but it helps other film junkies find the show and continue to spread a love of classic and contemporary film. For guest inquiries or live bookings, you can email me, Jeff Graham, at guests@AfterBuzzTV.com. That's GUESTS@AFTERBUZZ.com. For more incredible film content, check us out online at The Popcorn Talk, and we'll see you after the credits.